Hi everyone, my name is Matt and welcome to another Hobby Hour tutorial and speed painting challenge. Today we're going to paint this Tyranid Termagant, and in less than 30 minutes we're going to go from this to this. Here are the rules. I laid out the paints on my wet palette, and I'll be keeping track of time with a stopwatch on my phone. I'll start the timer before I start painting each layer, and I'll turn the timer off after I set the model down. I started out with a gray and Wraithbone Zenithal style prime, just like in my other Tyranid videos, but I'm deviating from there a little bit and beginning with a dry brush of white. I wanted to lighten up the prime just a little bit before applying the next layers. Next I used some skeleton horde all over the model. If you remember on the other Tyranids, we just painted this on the skin and tried to avoid painting the other areas. On large numbers of troops, we just won't have the time to do that, and it's easier and quicker to just paint the whole model. Plus, it won't make much of a difference anyway when we go to paint the other areas. I left the skeleton horde to dry, and then dry brushed with bone white, followed by a lighter dry brush of off-white. Now, you might be wondering why I'm not counting the drying time or the time spent mixing colors on the stopwatch. And my reasoning for that is because this color scheme is designed for army painting. When painting a horde army, you're not going to paint one model at a time. You're going to paint several, maybe even a dozen at a time. And when you paint one model in the batch, you can move on to the next one while the first one dries. Next, I painted the scales with a mix of 3 parts Flesh Terror's Red and 1 part Black Templar. Some people might be intimidated by mixing paint, or maybe even believe that it takes too much time. In reality, if you're using a custom mix for an army, I'd recommend mixing a bottle of that color. That way you only have to mix it once. Once it's mixed and in its own bottle, it's just like any other color in your box of paint. So when designing the color scheme for the gaunts, I wanted to make sure they fit in with the rest of the army as a whole, but just painted faster. So I had to think about what really defines the look of the models, where do I have to focus my effort, and where can I cut corners. Another way of thinking about it is when the army is on the tabletop and I'm standing from a few feet away, what are the main characteristics I see? The biggest thing that stands out to me is the orange on the scales. I wanted to make sure I had enough time to do that, so I had to make cuts elsewhere. This led to me adjusting some of the color recipes in such a way that I could achieve a similar result, but with less effort. Next I took some pink horror and painted the tongue and the details on the gun. Rather than painting the gun a solid color, I decided to add some variation with a blended effect. I blended the pink on the barrel of the gun by rinsing the brush and then wiping the damp brush along the edge of the pink. Once the pink area is dried, I got out some Magos purple and I painted a layer on the tongue and the gun. If you get some paint on the scales that are on top of the gun, that's okay, since they'll get an opaque base coat later. Just make sure to avoid getting any paint on the hands. Then I took some Magos purple and added some color to the feet, arms, and tail. I blended this the same way as the pink earlier. Just apply some of the purple, rinse the brush, wipe it on a paper towel, and drag the damp brush along the edge. This is diluting the paint slightly and making it appear to blend with the layers underneath. With the Magos purple dry, I went back and applied a second coat to deepen the color. Just like the last layer, I put some paint down on one section at a time and then blended the edge. I noticed a couple spots on the tail and the foot that needed a touch-up, so I quickly did that. Then I switched over to Carroburg Crimson and painted it over the tongue and the pink areas on the gun, both to deepen the color and to provide a little more variety. I thought I hit stop here, but the clock kept running, and I ended up losing a few seconds before I noticed. Now for the scales. I know I won't have the time to edge highlight the scales with red and then orange, but I still need to lighten the scales a little bit, or the orange will look too stark. So I took an older No. 2 brush and made a chisel tip on the end by dragging it on the palette. Normally it's a good idea to rotate the brush as you gather paint, which helps form the hairs into a point, but in this case the chisel tip is a better option. I'd say this technique is somewhere between a glaze and a dry brush. The paint is thinned slightly and there's barely any on the brush, so it's tinting the underlayer just like a glaze would. But I'm dragging it and hitting only the raised edges the way a dry brush would work. The paint is also leaving a streaky kind of mark, which will really help with the orange highlight later. By painting the red in this way, we're shaving a few minutes off each model, and over the course of an army, it really adds up. Next I took some Thunderhawk blue and painted all the claws and teeth. If you watched my other Tyranid videos, you'll know that I used contrast paint to base coat those, and what I'm doing here is different. This is another one of the color recipes that I had to adjust. Since I knew I'd be a little sloppy with the other colors, I needed an opaque base coat for the claws. I also won't have time to edge highlight the claws with two separate colors like the other models, so I'll have to see if I can get a similar result using only one highlight. I took some Dorn yellow and painted all the crack details, and the oval shape on the gun. I also used the Dorn yellow to paint the eyes. I made a mistake on this eye, so I used some black to touch it up, and while I had the black paint on my brush, I figured I should paint the pupils too. Then I took some Gryph-hound orange, thinned with equal parts water, and I painted this over the yellow areas. This is the opposite from how I did the other models, where I base coated with orange and then highlighted yellow. That way is a little too precise and time intensive, so I won't be able to do it. By base coating yellow first and thinning down the orange shade, it achieves a similar result in a lot less time. I noticed a couple spots I forgot on the gun, so I quickly base coated those. Then I set the model down to dry for a minute, and then gave those 2 spots a shade too. Now I'm using a familiar mix to paint the claws. I took 4 parts Black Templar and 1 part Incubi Darkness, the same base coat as my other models, but I added 1 part water to the mix. Then I painted this as a shade all over the claws. The addition of water will help it flow into the recesses better, leaving some of the Thunderhawk blue showing around the edges. That will help provide the foundation for my edge highlights later. Now for the most time-consuming part of the model. I highlighted the edges of the scales with some thinned Fire Dragon Bright. I'm following the edges that are sculpted on the model, making some of my own, and I'm also following any of the red streaks from the Evil Sun's Scarlet layer earlier. Downstrokes are going to be the most accurate to paint, so I like to turn the model while I paint to get the best angles. Edge highlighting can be really tough, and it can be even tougher to do it fast. This might be one of those details where it's better to take it slow. A good idea might be to finish the models without the orange highlights, that way you can get to gaming, and then paint the highlights as you find the time. Now we're in the final minute, so it's really a race against the clock to highlight the claws with rust gray. If you remember the colors I used in my other videos, it was Thunderhawk Blue followed by Fenrisian Gray. I was testing some colors, and the Fenrisian Gray was just too light to go over the claws without a mid-tone. I knew I wouldn't have the time for that, so I opted with a slightly darker gray. In the end, it looks close enough when it's compared next to the other models, so I'm fine with that choice. I just noticed a mistake on the back of his head, and I think I have the time to fix it with some bone white. And there we go, all done in under 30 minutes. I hope you enjoyed the speed painting ride and learned something new about painting armies. If you liked the video, please click the like button below, and don't forget to subscribe. I have lots of new content in the works, with a new video each Wednesday. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, happy painting.